Yeah, like you're something to do with passport control. Oh, there we go. Into the tunnel. Well, that's been wonderful. Back to England now after a nice trip to Normandy. For me to see where William the Conqueror started, it was brilliant. Shame you couldn't be there. But anyway, that's it for this series. Ta-da now. Well, all right then. Actually, I've just had a thought, seeing as how we have just gone into the tunnel, haven't we? It takes as long to get from one side to the other as it does to play our programme. So whilst we're in here, why don't you roll the titles? Hey, Normandy. We're in Normandy. What's the French for this is absolutely fab? Right. This is where it all started for William the Conqueror, you know. Yeah, all right. But that is why we're here. All to do it. Yeah, all right, they're into horses as well. And cheese. And cider. And brandy. Yeah, we'll do all that, but we are here for William. Don't forget. All right? And you're reading French. I didn't know you could speak French. Well, give it to me and what's the French for? Could I have a coffee as well, please? All right. It's not happening. And the city of Caen is very much Normandy's capital. Busy centre that was set up by William and his men. Do you know that Normandy actually means Norse man land? Because only 100 years before William, they were Vikings. Norse man land. Yeah? Well, this was his seat of power. And 900 years later, this was the scene for a very different power struggle. And this is what it was all about. Firepower. This is just one of the German batteries that made up Hitler's Atlantic Wall, a great long line of enormous guns pointing out to sea. This is the only battery where the guns have been left in place. There are just 4 of them here, but there was a huge line of them, all pointing out to sea, because Hitler's Nazi Germany always feared an invasion from over there. And this is one of their perfectly preserved lookout points. From here, they could spot anything moving on the horizon. And through an incredibly sophisticated form of underground telecommunications, they could train any one of the guns or all of the guns behind them on any spot out there. If you want to see what it looks like from the outside, you've got to go down here. And actually, if we do that, I'll also show you something in the next bay, which is quite remarkable. Yeah, maybe I'll see you down there, eh? The tiny little fishing village of Arromanches, which became the unlikely centre for the whole of the Allied forces' invasion into France. Unlikely because it didn't have a port or a harbour, so they brought one with them. Now, step 1 was to actually get onto the shore itself, and that happened, of course, on D-Day, June the 5th and 6th. And in just 1 hour, between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning, 135,000 men and 20,000 vehicles landed on this soil under incredibly heavy fire. Terribly brave men in weather conditions almost exactly the same as they are today. And then the next day, they brought across this harbour, which is known as a mulberry. There was Mulberry A and Mulberry B. This is Mulberry B. It's prefabricated, and it was dragged across and then assembled over here. 2.5 million men used that mulberry. Hundreds of thousands of vehicles and millions of tons of goods, ammunition, food, and everything else that helped the forces move south into France. 5 beaches were used for the landing in all, and they were all given code names. 3 of them with very British names: Gold, Sword, and Juno. And the other 2 were over there. and they were called Utah and Omaha. Okay, so you're going to read it in French, are you? Well, I shall do it in English. And then there were the Americans, and in particular the heroic Ranger Commandos under the leadership of James E. Rudder. Just 220 Rangers came to take this point, Point de Hoc. Incredibly brave men who came in on just small boats. They were faced with huge cliffs that they had to negotiate, and once they got to the top of them, this enormous German battery, which had been here for a good while, the Germans were well and truly dug in and prepared. But they climbed those cliffs. They'd been rehearsing on the Isle of Wight. They climbed those cliffs, they got up here, and they basically said to the Germans, "We're here now, chaps, and we'd like you to leave." This gives you some idea of the ferocity of that day's battle. That's a shell crater. One shell making a hole that big. Of course, it wasn't just the 220 Rangers. After that, men swarmed ashore. They had a Mulberry as well, Mulberry A, but it broke up in bad weather, so they had to land in a different way, which made their task even more difficult. You cannot emphasize enough the bravery of the people who launched this assault. And quite rightly so. Point de Hoc has been left exactly as it was after that day. A memorial to those very, very brave men. Just outside the city of Caen are some beautiful gardens and a memorial for peace. It takes the history from 1918 up to the Second World War and beyond it to remind us of our responsibility for maintaining peace. The price for victory during the Second World War, including civilians and soldiers, was 50 million people. This is Bayeux War Cemetery, and it's just one of many war cemeteries all over Normandy. This one alone has over 4,600 graves in it, and just across the road is a memorial to another 1,800 soldiers who never had a grave. Each one of these headstones has a name on it, apart from those where the soldier is unknown, and each one of those names is a testimony to absolute bravery. There's an old saying which I like, which is, "A nation that forgets its past will repeat it." Now, when you're in Bayeux, you have to call in and see my old friend William the Conqueror. Here he is, dressed exactly as he would have done in Hastings in 1066. And how do we know that? Well, mainly because the clergy wrote everything down in those days, but also because William was the subject of an 11th century comic strip. Perhaps the most valuable piece of soft furnishing in the world. And this is it. It must be one of the most remarkable pieces of cloth and one of the most important documents in the world. It's 230 feet long. This is telling the whole story, right back from King Edward telling Harold to come over and see William, from Harold getting to know William and them fighting together, and all the story that I've been telling you over all of these weeks. Right the way round here, it was undoubtedly commissioned by Bishop Odo, who was William's half-brother. And it was probably done for William's wife, Matilda. And they think that it may well have been embroidered, because it isn't really a tapestry, it's an embroidery. It's probably been embroidered by English monks in an abbey over in England. It was displayed in Bayeux to actually explain to the Norman people what had happened and why William really did have, as he thought, a claim to the English throne. And that's Harold getting hit by an arrow, as you can see, and this is Harold actually being cut down by swords later. There was an arrow still in his head in the original tapestry, but it's fallen out. And this is where the tapestry comes to an end. It will almost certainly have gone on to tell the story of William being crowned in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day. During the Revolution in France, it was damaged, so they've done their best to repair it, but that's where it ends. Still an astonishing piece of work. And what do you get from a huge mountain of apples? Correct, cider. I'm going to give you the A to Z of making Calvados, which uses cider. A is for apples. There are 4 kinds of apples used in Calvados, and in fact they plant the 4 different trees in a row in the orchards. They pick them ready mixed, and then they wash them and transport them at the same time. Clever, eh? And then, thanks to Mr. Archimedes, they go up a giant screw, which eventually drops them down into the equivalent of a Kenwood shed. And then it goes into a giant press and comes out as apple juice. Do you know, you could drink it like that, or not. And then you put the apple juice into these huge containers. Nothing is added and nothing is taken away. The apple juice ferments all on its own in 3 to 5 weeks, and then you wait. And you wait with these and those and some more over here. In fact, containers that hold 5 million litres of apple juice or cider, as it's now become, stored in here, waiting for distillation. Hello? And then you bring your cider to be distilled. And these are the stills, made out of copper, which is the only metal that you can use. And, thank you, my beautiful assistant. This is roughly how it works. You have a furnace here which heats up the cider. It turns into a steam here, which comes down, warms up that bit of cider there, which is the next lot to go in. And then it goes in there and cools down and turns back into a liquid again. And no, that is not the end of the process. You have to put 12 litres in at that end to get 1 litre out at the other end once it's been distilled. And still, we haven't finished. I'm sorry. Because the next stage is when you put it into these enormous oak casks. It's actually clear liquid when it goes into these, and it takes its colour from the oak itself. It also gives it a flavour, and it gets smoother as it's kept in these. Each one of these holds 53,000 hectolitres of Calvados. And guess what? We've still not finished, because from here it goes to smaller casks where it will stay for up to 40 years. Got some time on your hands, have you? And then, if you're very patient, you eventually get to try the stuff. That's 5 years old, that's 10 years old, that's 15 years old, and that is vintage Calvados. No. What? Oh, the Z. Oh, yes, of course. The A to Z. The Z is for what happens if you have too many of these. You have lots of Zs. Right. Now, if I was you, I'd switch that thing off. Take a bit of a break. Look, we'll pick something up along the way, all right? I know you're hungry. This is Caen Market, first thing in the morning, full of life, and it would have been like this all that time ago when young William the Conqueror... Now, come on. We are not going to go all this way without talking about the man. After all, this is his town. He's even buried here. So, we've got to start telling his story. What's the matter? You want to take one of those home? I don't think they're for pets, you know. This is a French market. They do, however, love their equine friends. Horses here are not just sport, they're a religion. And trotting is the main sport. They've got a stud every 4 kilometres around here. They're mad for it. Specially trained horses, not galloping, but trotting. And have you got any of that sort of foldy French stuff? Have you? great. Go on, go on, go on. Go. They've been doing this for donkey's years, you know. Well, horse's years. In fact, about as long as I've been losing money. I'm sorry. Now it's time for William. This is where it all began. Falaise Castle. Actually, looking at it, you know, it's almost identical to the Tower of London. And if you press your replay button, when we were down in London looking at it, you'll see the similarity. And it's not surprising, really, because this is where William's life began. In fact, his dad, Robert the Devil, looked out of one of those windows down here, and he saw a beautiful young girl called Arlotte, who was a tanner's daughter, washing in this very stream. They've now turned it into a little fountain area. Anyway, he got to know Arlotte rather well because she started to carry his child. And during her pregnancy, she had a dream that her intestines burst out and entwined not only Normandy, but England. And the local people who were into prophecy decided that that meant her child would not only be the ruler of Normandy, but also the King of England. And he was, because that child was William. From the moment he was born, he was treated specially. In fact, his dad, who had other sons, said that he would be his successor as the Duke of Normandy. And lots of people tried to bump him off when he was a little kid here. But when he got to be a big boy, he went after those baddies and did them in himself. And thus, taking together all of the little sort of principalities of Normandy, turned it into one mighty state. And that helped him launch the invasion of England. He was also a bit brutal when it came to his own relationship. He wanted a wife who would give him power, so he married a princess from neighbouring Flanders. That princess was Matilda. She was actually a cousin of his, and she didn't like him very much, so he dragged her around by a hair until eventually she said she did like him. Yeah, I know, I told you, he was a brutal man. Anyway, the Pope decided that this marriage was not on, so he excommunicated them, which is bad news if you're a Catholic. But 9 years later, with a new Pope, everything was forgiven. Perhaps because he was now a very powerful man. And in celebration, they built 2 abbeys here in Caen. One for men and one for women. This is hers. And this is where Queen Matilda, William's wife, was laid to rest in 1083. Place of honour in the abbey that is her own. And this is his abbey for men. You know, William and Matilda's story was a love story. Most blokes in those days had a mistress or two and several children by them, but William never did. He and Matilda had 10 children. It's a bit surprising, really, because he was doing an awful lot of fighting, and it has to be said, he wasn't here to do the washing up or put the kids to bed too often. He may well have been away from home a lot, but he was here long enough to start this, Caen Castle, which he started in 1060. Actually, it was his son, Henri, who finished it off some time later. This Duke was a remarkable man. I mean, he really was from a tiny part of the world, and yet he took England against our will and transformed it. Everything that we know today, the way that we work, our aristocracy, it's all down to William the Conqueror. And of course, he was being fought from all sides, not just from us, so he needed a castle like this. Normandy today is very much part of France. But when William was a lad, it wasn't. And in fact, he spent his last days fighting the French. And even his death was as dramatic as the rest of his life. William died in Rouen. He'd been fighting the King of France. He fell off his horse and died about a month later from his injuries. During the latter part of his life, he'd put on a lot of weight, and to put it perfectly bluntly, they made a coffin that was too small for him. Anyway, he had to be carried back to Caen to be buried here in his own abbey. But as he got here, a man rushed out. He was angry with William because he had evicted his father to build this very abbey. The pallbearers slipped and dropped the coffin, and William's body exploded. I know, it's not nice, but it's true. They managed to put the remains of his body into the grave here, but even then he didn't rest in peace in his beautiful abbey, because during the Battle of the Churches, William's body was stolen. They managed to find the bones and they brought it back. And then came the revolution and they stole his body again, leaving only his thigh bone. So here in his glorious abbey is the thigh bone of the Duke of Normandy, King of England, William the Conqueror. Oh, all right then, Guienne the Conqueror. Roses? What do you want to be buying roses? The girlfriend. I'd forgotten about the girlfriend. It's not the one that played Joan of Arc in your local amateur dramatics thing, is it? Anyway, this is the Church of Saint-Pierre, just across the road from the chateau. And, all right, thank you, because I don't know very much about... It's in French. I can't... Apparently, it's 12th century, but the nave, which is very ornate inside, is 13th century. I need a bit more. Right, and it's a perfect marriage of lots of architectural designs over lots of periods, and it's really reminiscent of a great number of French churches. And just a minute. You've got an English version as well. Now look, I'm a little tired after experiencing William. It's been an emotional moment for me, so why don't you just bobby off and go and have a look round Caen and all of the area. All right? You know, the great thing about this job is you can make people go, wow! Just like that. Shall we do it again? Wow! That is Mont Saint-Michel. Now, you've seen the Cornwall equivalent, which is St Michael's Mount. That is the Norman version. Actually, perhaps a little more impressive. Although it wasn't always Norman, it used to be part of Brittany. And do you know, William came here as well. No, look, I'll tell you what, I shall finish with just one final fact, which not many people know. Harold, who later became King Harold, fought on that sand side by side with William the Conqueror against the Britons. Now then, go and tell that one down the pub, get you a pint. And that's about it for Normandy. In fact, that's about it for the series. We've been all over the place, haven't we? We've been North York Moors, Caledonian Canal, Shetland, we've been down to Dorset, we've been under London, we've been in the Claine Peninsula, we've been everywhere. Shall we do some more sometime? Okay. For now, we've got to get back up to Calais. There we go then, the programme over, and we're on the other side. I bet William would like to have got over here that quickly. Right, that's it. All done. Except for next time you see us, when we'll have a sort of compilation of all the bits you haven't seen in the series, as well as lots of bits that I'd prefer you not to see, really. Sort of, it'll be all wrong on the night. Right. Do you need a lift home then? What do you mean no? Your girlfriend's picking you up.